Hello students, welcome to Learner's Planet. Again, we are back with the biology class and the topic we have to study now further is again fundamental unit of life. So in this next session, we are again continuing the basic structural and functional unit of life, that is cell. In the previous sessions, we have studied that all organisms, they are made up of cells, but they all are different from each other. Now in this session onwards, we are going to understand the structure of the cell, the structural similarities of the cells. So whatever differences we have studied, that was on the basis of the number of cells, size or shape of the cells, or the complexity, that is prokaryotic or eukaryotic cells. All are studied in the previous sessions. Now let us start with the basic structural similarity of all these cells. So in this session we are going to study about the different parts of the cells. All organisms are made up of cells. This is the important fact. Now you can clearly see this diagram here. It is a picture of animal cell. And as you can see these membrane bound organelles here, so definitely we can say that this is an example of eukaryotic cells. So if we are giving this picture here, so here by all organisms we mean the eukaryotic organisms. But even the prokaryotic organisms, they are also made up of cells only. The difference would be what? These organelles are not present. The nucleus is present in the form of nucleoid. So our body, that is in the case of multicellular organisms, there are millions and billions of these cells which are functioning in a coordinated form, in a well organized manner, and thus they are giving rise to a living organisms. In the case of unicellular organisms, all these life-sustaining functions are performed by a single cell only. Now all these organisms, whether it is prokaryotic or it is eukaryotic, whether it is unicellular or multicellular, they basically differ from each other. Now they differ on what basis? Of course, we have just said on the basis of size, shape and the number of the cells they are made up of. But despite of such kind of differences, the basic components are almost same. The level of function or the functional property may vary, but the basic structural parts are going to be same in all kind of cells, whether it is prokaryotic or it is eukaryotic, unicellular or multicellular. So what are these basic components of the cells? Generally we can say they are having a cell membrane, nucleus and cytoplasm. There is no cell which is devoid of these three parts. Of course, when we compare the prokaryotic and the eukaryotic cells, the structural differences would arise, but the component will surely be present over there. If it is a nucleus, in the case of prokaryotes, it will be present in the form of a nucleoid region. In the case of eukaryotes, it will be present in the form of a well-developed membrane-bound nucleus organelle. If it is cell membrane, then only an outer membrane boundary would be present in the prokaryotic cells, whereas in the eukaryotic cells, a developed plasma membrane is present as well as other membrane-bound organelles also present. In the cytoplasm, the membrane-bound organelles are present in the eukaryotes. But in the case of prokaryotes, it is going to be different as there is no membrane-bound organelle and therefore the chemical composition is also going to vary. But this does not mean the cytoplasm is absent. It is present but in a different variant form. chemically or functionally. So, what the cell membrane is? The cell membrane is an outer boundary of the cell. Cytoplasm, it is a jelly-like substance which is present inside the particular cell membrane. Thirdly, there is a nucleus which is the control center of the cell. Let us understand these 3 points with the help of this diagram. This is an example of eukaryotic cell in which it is a cross-section area. If you cut it from in the middle, you will observe such type of structure. So this outer line, you can observe here this outer boundary. This is actually known as cell membrane. But the cell membrane is a common term which is given to each and every living membrane present inside the cell. That is, whether it is present in a membrane-bound organelle or an outer boundary of the cell. All these membranes are known as cell membrane only. But this particular outer boundary is usually known as plasma membrane. You all have heard about this particular term. So the outermost boundary of the cell is known as plasma membrane. So if we say this outermost boundary is there, then it has to be termed as plasma membrane. Rather, all other boundaries which are enclosing certain organelles or the functional compartments inside the cell, then these organelle membrane would be known as a simple cell membrane. However, the structure is almost similar, and that definitely we are going to study further. So, each and every cell is having a cell membrane. In the case of eukaryotic cell, an outer boundary is present, that is cell membrane or the plasma membrane, but no membrane bound organelle is present. As you can see inside these cells, the small structures are found which are enclosed in these small boundaries or the cell membranes. So such structures are not observed in the case of prokaryotic cells. And this makes a huge difference between a eukaryotic cell and the prokaryotic cell, and of course their function. The second part which is common in all of the cell is nucleus. Each cell contains nucleus. What is this nucleus? It is known as the brain of the cell, or it is known as the director of the cell. Why? The reason is because it is a control unit, as it contains the chromosomes. And what these chromosomes contains? They contain the genes. Genes are the functional unit of life. All the information is actually stored in the genes, and these genes are located on the chromosomes, which is present inside the nucleus. Hence, nucleus is known as the master body here. Now, can you compare the nucleus of a eukaryotic and a prokaryotic cell? We have already said, and in the previous session we studied that in the case of prokaryotes, nucleus is found in a particular region which is not separated from the cytoplasm with such type of nuclear membrane. You can see this boundary here in surrounding blue color. It is absent in the case of prokaryotic cells, but definitely chromosomes or the nuclear material is present in the form of in the nuclear region. So we can say whatever kind of cell it is definitely having this control center, either as a developed nucleus or in its primitive form, in its native form. Further, the third part is cytoplasm. It is this jelly-like matrix which is filling the cavity inside the cell membrane, in which all other organelles are actually embedded. So all these are basically, it is made up of water and different type of chemicals. So it is an aqueous solution, a solution which is made up of water and various biomolecules. Now this cytoplasm is also common in all kind of cells. Variation occurs in terms of its molecular composition, in terms of functional strength or functional integrity of these particular organelles, the level of intensity of these functions which are performed by different organelles. They may vary with the type of the cell or the location of the cell where it is present, or the type of organ in which these cells are going to participate. That can make a difference on that basis, but of course the basic structural units are going to be similar. So let us begin with each and every part now. Let us start with the plasma membrane or the cell membrane. So this plasma membrane, as we have already said, it is the outermost boundary of the cell. If it is present in surrounding any organelle, then it is commonly known as cell membrane. But the basic features, basic characteristics or properties of the membrane is going to be similar, whether it is plasma membrane or it is any other kind of membrane. So now we are studying these characteristics or the properties with respect to plasma membrane. Definitely these basic features are also common for other cell membranes also. Although there are the differences in terms of type of these molecule, or we can say the movement of the molecules, or whatever, that we are going to describe all together with time. Now let us take plasma membrane as a basic membrane and we'll understand the basic features here. So the very first property of plasma membrane is that these membranes or the plasma membrane is a living membrane. A very first basic point that we must understand regarding the plasma membrane. Can you think of the reason why it is known as a living membrane? The reason is that a cell, if we remove the membrane from outside of the cell, then they cannot survive. And this is why we are calling it as a living membrane. So, if this plasma membrane is a living membrane, then can you think of any membrane in the cell which is non-living? Is this a practical fact? So actually the plant cells or the fungal cells, they are having another membrane in its surrounding. That means the plasma membrane, above that the another layer is also present, that we commonly call as cell wall, and the cell wall is known as non-living membrane. Now the reason you can think of why it is known as non-living, the reason is very simple, because if in the laboratory conditions we remove that outer cell wall, then in that case further we are keeping it in a correct osmotic conditions or in the standard conditions, then those cells can grow even without the cell membrane or without the cell wall. But if in another case this plasma membrane is removed in the cell, in the laboratory conditions, then of course the cells could not survive. And this is why we call this plasma membrane as a living membrane and the cell wall as a dead membrane. The next point here is all these plasma membranes, they are porous in nature. You know what is porous? Porous means there are pores in between. It is not a rigid membrane. It is not like it is compactly packed membrane. There are the gaps in between. And these gaps, the presence of such pores, makes it porous. Further, although it is porous in nature, it serves as a barrier. What do you mean by that? If we mean by that, this, you know what is the function of a barrier, or which thing we call as a barrier? The barrier is we can say a boundary, or there is a restriction which is actually separating the two sides. If you keep a particular boundary and then the things are not able to intermix on either side of such kind of barriers. So why we are calling this membrane as a barrier? The reason is it is present in surrounding the cell cytoplasm, and as it is present, so it won't allow the internal environment and the external environment of the cells to get mixed up, although it is porous. If pores are present, then there is a possibility of the intermixing of the material, but the barrier, it is serving as a barrier also. So it won't allow the entire interaction between the external and the internal environment here. And this is a special feature of the living membrane or the plasma membrane, that it won't allow the intermixing of the two different environments in and out of the cell. Further, although it is a barrier, but it is not a strict barrier over there. That means further these are semi-permeable in nature. See, we are calling it as a barrier which is keeping the two environment of the cell, that is external and internal, away from each other. But of course they are porous. Now if they are porous, then there is the possibility of the movement of the material. So this porous nature and the barrier nature is somewhat fashioned in a semi-permeable form. What we mean by that? That means it is partially porous. Now there is nothing like partial here, but we are just trying to explain this thing. Porous means porous where the pores are present, but these pores are not so large that the entire content inside and outside the cell is going to intermix. Only few molecules or the few content material can cross this particular barrier. Why? Because it is porous in nature. So such type of nature is therefore giving the property of semi-permeability to the ring membrane. Now again another aspect, if it is semi-permeable, then is that so that any kind of molecule or the content can cross the barrier? No, it is not so. But the fact here is that only the specific molecules, they can cross this particular barrier. This membrane will not allow any of the molecule to exit or enter the cell. Rather, it is with respect to the specific molecules only, which are according to the need of the cell, and therefore this membrane is known as selectively permeable membrane. Now you can think the another property here is plasma membrane is a selectively permeable membrane. Why selectively? The reason is because it is going to allow the entry and exit of the certain specific molecules across this particular porous barrier. Further, these membranes, they are made up of lipids and proteins. So this is the chemical composition of the plasma membrane. Usually lipids are maintaining this porosity of the living membrane, whereas proteins, it helps in the recognition of material that has to cross this particular boundary, or it is serving as an enzyme receptor here, or it is controlling the movement of the particles across the boundary. Now further, let us understand these each features with the help of certain diagrams now. So we are calling this plasma membrane as the living boundary. So the two words are now coming here, living and covering, or the boundary of the cell. So living, as we have already stated, it is because if the membrane is removed, the cell is not able to survive. You can see the location with the help of this diagram, and we have already quoted it earlier. The outermost boundary, which is enclosing the cytoplasm and the nucleus inside. Such boundaries, they are known as the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. Also, internally, there are several membrane-bound organelles. Now, these membrane-bound organelles, actually, a membrane in these organelles, it will help to keep the internal and external environment of these organelles separated from each other. They won't allow the mixing up of the internal matrix of these organelles with that of the cytoplasm. So cell membrane, it serves as the covering of the cell if it is the outermost boundary, or it serves as the boundary line for the organelles also. Now if it is the plasma membrane, it is enclosing the cytoplasm and the nucleus. But if it is the organellar membrane, then it is keeping the cytoplasm and the content of the organelle separated from each other. Further, they are made up of lipids and proteins. You can see this in the form of this diagram. There are protein molecules as well as there are lipid molecules. You can see these round structures with tails. If you compare a single hand and this black colored tail here, then this is a single lipid molecule. We can show you with the help of diagram here. It is something like this. This is a round structure which is the head part of the lipid, and there are two tail-like structures below this thing, below this lipid molecule. So these two parts will make the lipid molecule, a single lipid molecule. In this case, this head region, it is hydrophilic in nature. What you mean by hydrophilic? It means water loving. And this below tail part is hydrophobic in nature. That means which is water hating. It tends to move away from the water part. So here, to maintain the structure, see, the water part molecules are present towards the exterior of the cell as well as interior of the cell in the cytoplasm. So how these molecules are going to arrange here? So this is actually because they are arranged in the two layers here. You can see that another molecule will be placed like this, as it is shown in this particular diagram. This is forming one layer and the second layer is formed here. Outer and inner part is having this hydrophilic region and the middle part is having these tails. Now these tails, they are having several bonds and they are flexible. So the nature or the type of these lipid molecules which are present here in the bilayer structure, that is responsible for providing the flexibility to the membrane or permeability. It is these tails present in these molecules which will control the gaps present in these membranes. So thus it controls the flexibility of the plasma membrane. Besides, there are the proteins which are present here. They are present either embedded in the layer or towards the outer side, and they are actually helping in the transport of the material in and out of the cell. Not only this much, they also help in the recognition of the molecule which has to be transported. So although it is serving as a barrier here, but all the molecules cannot cross the barrier, although it is porous in nature. And why this is possible? It is because of the presence of these proteins in the layer. Further, we said that it is porous in nature. Now we can say why it is porous in nature. We have seen that the tail part or the hydrophilic part of the lipid molecule is somewhat flexible. So they can change their position or they can move here and there in the membrane itself. So such type of property of the lipid molecules makes it porous in nature. But it is not so that entire lipid molecules can run away from the membrane. It is not as per their choice. It is actually, it depends on the situation or the function over there. So this porous nature is present, but it is in the partial form, and hence we are calling it as a semi-permeable membrane. If something is porous, it increases the permeability, but it is not completely permeable. It is a semi-permeable membrane. Why? Because it controls only several molecules to cross the boundary. So when only several molecules are being crossed, then it is not that any molecule will get up and it will go for an outing. or any molecule can come as a guest inside. No, it is always in a controlled manner. It is always in the way like only specific molecules are going to cross this semi-permeable boundary. And this is the reason why we are calling it as a selectively permeable membrane. And definitely such type of properties which are serving in a controlled manner, thus it is called as a barrier now. Now continuously we are saying that this permeable membrane can allow the movement or the exchange of materials. Can you think how? How this type of movement is taking place? So the movement of material or the molecule across this membrane can take place in two ways. What are these two ways? That is diffusion and osmosis. So let us summarize this point with the help of this particular flow chart. Molecular movement, we can say it occurs either by diffusion or by osmosis. So diffusion, it means a movement of solute particle. Mind it, diffusion is a movement of solute from a region of its high concentration to a region of its low concentration. This is how we can define the process of diffusion. We all have studied this in the chemistry. So basically it is a similar process. Diffusion is if you keep something over there and it starts moving from a region of high concentration to a region of its low concentration, then the process would be known as diffusion. Think of certain examples. We all have studied in chemistry. Like, let us say, if we burn an incense stick and we keep it in a corner of the room, then those smoke particles or the gaseous particles can move from that particular region to the entire room. So where it was in the high region, in the high concentration, where the incense stick was burnt. From there it was moving, it was migrating towards the low region. So this is one of the example in the case of general chemistry. But can you think of the example in the living system? Example is exchange of gases in the living cells during respiration. This is one of the example for diffusion. Can you think of again how it is taking place? Let us assume a bacteria. It is living in the surrounding, let us say in the soil or in the water or anywhere. If it is in water or even if it is in the soil, then it is surrounded by a thin droplet of water also. And these waters are containing a dissolved oxygen. So the content or the concentration of oxygen is low inside the cytoplasm and it is higher towards the outer side of the plasma membrane. So what will happen? The molecules, oxygen molecules, tends to move from a higher concentration region to a region of its low concentration. That means the oxygen will tend to move from exterior to the interior of the cell. And the reverse will happen for the carbon dioxide. Another way in which these molecules can move across the membrane is osmosis. What is osmosis? It is similar to the diffusion. Generally, the water molecules can also follow the law of diffusion. But water is a solvent. It is not a solute. So the process name is osmosis. In this case, we can define it as a movement of water molecules from a region of its high concentration to a region of low concentration across the semi-permeable membrane. Diffusion can take place even without the presence of a membrane. But osmosis, it needs a semi-permeable membrane in between the two regions where the exchange is taking place. So, example, you can understand like absorption of water from the soil by the roots in case of plants. We all know that roots are present in the soil and the soil is having the water. So, the membrane of the root is very thin. As water is present in high concentration in the surrounding, that is in the soil, so it tends to move from surrounding towards the interior of the root cells. So this is one of the examples. And how this process is taking place, how it affects the cellular structure, all this we are going to study in the next session. So further we are going to study we will continue in the next session. Till then, thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye bye.